To many people, these events can seem unrelated to each other. While they happen often enough and in many different places, there is no obvious link among them. For example, what does the war in Nepal have to do with internet surveillance in Korea? Does media censorship have any effect on the condition of rural women? And for that matter, what does Microsoft CEO Bill Gates have in common with Thailand's Prime Minister Thaksin? The connection among them is not obvious, but it is quite real. Poverty and underdevelopment in Asia and the social divide between rich and poor nations is clearly involved. Less obviously, however, they all tend to affect the exercise of one of the most basic of human rights. The right to communicate and how it is actualized is the common thread that ties these events together. Each one of these seemingly isolated incidents and personalities affects the way and the extent to which people in Asia, especially the poor, get their information, understand it, and respond to it. In August 2004, an Asian communication rights workshop held in the Philippines pointed to a better understanding of how a wide range of issues and trends around the world is impacting on the right to communicate. Despite the downfall of many dictatorial governments in Asia, state censorship of the press and media remains a very real and powerful obstacle to communication rights in many Asian countries. The present government in Thailand is a particularly notorious regulator of all forms of media. Not too long ago, the editor of the Far Eastern Economic Review was practically kicked out of Thailand for an article he ran in the magazine that pointed to a business conflict between the King of Thailand and the Prime Minister. For this, the editor was put on a blacklist and his visa was revoked. He was reinstated only after he had made a public apology. One of the conference participants, Supinya Klangnarong, did not get off so lightly. She is facing a 40 billion baht libel suit for an expose on how the Shin Corporation has benefited from the Prime Minister's policies. Shin Corporation is owned by Thaksin. In Indonesia, the democratic reforms that followed the ouster of former President Suharto appear to have been short-lived. The censors are back in business. In the year 2003, the government passed a new broadcasting law which allows government inspectors to oversee program content. Media practitioners in Indonesia view this law as a clear threat to freedom of speech and expression. In Malaysia, the police raided the office of the online news daily Malaysia Kini and confiscated computers and servers. Police said they were investigating allegations that Malaysia Kini had committed a seditious act. Censorship of Malaysia's press and media is just one indication of a generally repressive society. In India, Ernest Dinadayalan reported how the government continues to crack down on films that it considers too critical of the administration. Movies and documentaries critical of the government have been banned from exhibition, even after these had participated in several international competitions and won awards for India. Inadequate access to information which people need is another obstacle to the right to communicate. The fact that most available information is in English is a direct cause of low access to information. The difficulties ordinary people face in trying to get information from the government is another example of this problem. Many people believe that the internet would provide universal access to information. Unfortunately, access to the internet has proved to be quite exclusive. A digital divide has opened up in cyberspace.
Does mere access to internet enable communication? The answer very often is no. A farmer cannot access the internet To begin with the high cost of the computers, question of literacy, the question of all those barriers which exist at one point in level.
The predominant use of the English language on the internet is a major obstacle.
Just in the language of the web, it is also in the programming language of the web, for example HTML, whose keywords are all based on English. And it is deeper than that. It is also in the programming languages of computers like Pascal or C or Java. All of these are based on English keywords. And it is even deeper than that. It is also in the language of the CPUs, the microprocessors that control the whole internet infrastructure. They are programmed in what are called microcodes, which control micro operations deep within the hardware level of microprocessor itself. And these microcodes are also based on English words. So this very deep-seated built-in bias for English works against the capabilities that will always be a barrier towards mastering the technology. So,
websites also generally use Roman letters when Asia has thousands of local scripts. Cambodia provides an example of the difficulty of using the local script in computer-based communication.
Normally this is just assumed everybody should have the right to use their own language. But in a case like Cambodia, a small country which does not have many highly trained people in computer science and computer technology, it is very difficult to develop the system to use the Cambodian script in computer communication.
Teledensity, or the number of users for every phone line, is still quite low in many Asian countries. Furthermore, many internet service providers are concentrated in urban centers, and when they do service the outskirts, few people can afford the high cost of subscription. Less than 10% of the world's media and ICT corporations now control the global media production and distribution, including news and entertainment, book publishing, and the recording industry. The result of this concentration of media ownership is a homogenization of program content, according to the interests of the new corporate owners. Apart from low profitability, government regulations, particularly licensing requirements, stand in the way of the development of community media.
The government basically makes no distinction between community radio and commercial radio, which basically means that you are asked to pay the same royalty fee and the same kinds of taxes that the community radios are made to pay, similar taxes and royalty fees that commercial radio stations are made to pay.
The deregulation of the telecommunications industry was intended to break up the monopoly of the big telecommunication companies and thus make the industry more effective and competitive. Unfortunately, the privatization of the telecommunications industry has neither improved access to telephones nor made the service more affordable to ordinary people, especially the poor.
Liberalization and market-led reforms per se have not closed the gaps of access. I think mainly because of affordability questions and access questions. And it is hard for the market to be able to solve all of this because there's a lot of market failure in societies such as ours. There's a lot of private interests and rent-seeking activity, and there is also the point of poverty, which basically undercut any purely market-driven response.
Copyrights and patents have increasingly privatized information and knowledge, thus limiting access to information or to the tools for using information, such as computer software. This and related trends constitute what is called the enclosure of knowledge. Under the trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights, or TRIPS agreement, the period of copyright control has been extended to 50 years after the death of the author or creator of the copyrighted material. Already, this is imposing serious limitations on developing countries, especially their education sector. However, there are plans to further extend the life of copyrights to 70 years. This would have deep repercussions for access to information in poor countries.
The stricter you are with respect to the movement of information, like sharing it, any kind of restriction over these user rights will hamper the use and the spread of information, and therefore to that extent IPR runs counter to the freedom to communicate.
Open source software is being promoted in response to the high cost of software licensing. However, progress has been slow in this regard. Software giants like Microsoft are putting up a fight.
In Australia, when two opposition parties adopted a policy to utilise open source software and encouraging the major opposition party to do the same, Bill Gates visited Australia about 4 weeks ago and offered $3 million worth of IT support to community groups.
The limitations on women's communication rights are simply the extension of old inequalities that women have had to deal with.
If you introduce communication rights, is that going to increase violence within the home? What kind of situation does she have? Does she have mobility to access a particular technology? The right to education, does she have basic literacy? You talk about communication rights, but if she's not taught the skills of articulation, how is she going to communicate? If she's been conditioned to not speak, how is she going to communicate?
There are other issues besides these, such as the severe restrictions on access to information in situations of armed conflict.
There have been great violations of rights of media practitioners, and it has increased to a great extent in the last 3 years, when the killings have actually also increased in the last 3 years. It has increased to such an extent that there have been constant and continuous expression of concern by right bodies, regional and international right bodies. Journalists are either punished arbitrarily by the military on the pretext of being working or sympathizing with the Maoists, or the Maoists attacking journalists in the pretext of them being government informants.
The erosion of civil rights, especially the right to privacy, is another urgent concern.
We have this database, population database, which has existed, computer database, a huge database of all the population. We call it civil registration database. It existed since 1981, and it developed into this mega huge database covering all types of personal information of citizens in Thailand. And now the same organization that's taking care of it is launching a smart card, which is a microchip card containing all fields of information, personal information from age, gender to health information.
Users of cyberspace are not exempt from privacy violations. Levels of surveillance have increased in recent years following the attack on the World Trade Center. A vast array of national and international laws and conventions is being put in place, giving enormous powers to governments and other agencies to monitor communication, especially digital communication.
Convention of Cybercrime Treaty. Cybercrime is a very important and very serious problem about the privacy violation because it includes several problems. For example, the civil rights in the cyberspace may be criminalized, and also cyber activism also that are criminalized by the pretext of cyber terrorism.
The range of issues that are involved in the right to communicate, from a general lack of education to the inequality between women and men, from intellectual property protection to privacy concerns, would already point to the nature of communication rights. Obviously, the right to communicate entails a lot more than freedom of opinion and expression. Freedom of expression presupposes that individuals or groups engaged in communication are equally free and equally able to come up with ideas and to impart them and to receive ideas from others. The reality, however, is that there are huge inequalities between and among people in regard to this freedom. To illustrate this point, take Rupert Murdoch, owner of News Corporation, one of the largest and most influential media corporations in the world, and an Asian woman who is poor, can barely read, knows little or no English, who has no access to a telephone, let alone a computer, and who lives in a society where women are discouraged from expressing themselves. Theoretically and by law, both have the same freedom of opinion and expression. But are they really equally free?
I guess communication rights are meta rights. They are foundational rights in which a lot of rights follow. Freedom of expression, freedom to assemble, freedom of religion, right to information. All of these other rights are in a sense based on this compendium of rights which we now call communication rights.
Don't let the system win. You never give in. Don't let the system win. 'Cause you never give in. Don't let the system win. You never give in.
Working to promote communication rights in Asia can take one in many different directions, considering the diversity of issues involved.
In Japan, I have a feeling that many people don't aware and don't care about communication rights and ICTR issues. So awareness building is very important.
I am more interested in sharing knowledge, sharing experience among countries. How can we facilitate people to use their communication right properly?
We need to build a body of information content, tools, infrastructure, networks, and hardware which are publicly accessible and controlled by the public and public domain. So this would mean granting users the right to use, the right to share, the right to modify all this content, these tools, this infrastructure in a way that is most beneficial to them.
I think one real important question for us when it comes to communication in writing and especially communication in the electronic communication is the question of the national language and the Cambodian language in the Cambodian script.
I work in the area of gender and information and communication technologies. So obviously the most important issues for me are those that have to do with how women are practicing or being enabled to practice their communication rights. Again, this goes back to bigger issues such as access, and as well as existing women's issues and concerns that might affect how they will apply their communication rights.
It's very important that different stakeholders across the region, not just within one country, work together, work as important pressure groups, make use of national as well as regional and international spaces wherever it's available.
All of these existing struggles and new struggles in information communication, these form different aspects of the communication rights agenda. We need to thread a lot of the things related to information communication which are being done already.
Tackling the issues separately will not work, not only because they are interrelated, but because the fulfillment of communication rights depends on the convergence of advocacy and action on these concerns. Like separate streams flowing into a mighty river, this convergence will transform these initiatives, making the whole greater than the sum of its parts, and ensuring that they are more than a match for the problems that stand in the way of our right to communicate.